Hello there friends and welcome. For today's BG3 guide we have a very special build. A life-stealing regenerating tank that combines the best of my previous tank characters. Decent enough armor class, full physical damage resistance for half damage taken, even the Radiating Orb attack rolls debuffs, with most importantly, Lifesteal as an area of effect. As a matter of fact, you'll be able to regenerate around 18 entire hit points per each one of your individual area of effect hitting cleaves, and you have around 8 maximum per turn, which means you can indeed restore and recover more than 100 hit points per turn even. The more enemies, the better for you. With quite capable damage as well, so it won't just be about tanking and debuffing and regenerating. And the best part is how early this is all available, as early as level 3 even. So without further ado, let us get into our life-stealing vampiric tank guide, first with character creation. When it comes to race, well, it's the usual race choices. After all, you are a melee character at heart, despite being a tank, and you still need to reach the enemies to get their attention and attack them, also debuff them. So great choices as always: Wood Elf or Wood Half Elf for higher movement speed, Githyanki for higher skills through astral knowledge, which can help a main character make as many skill checks as possible during dialogue, or just the classic Gnome for even better tanking when it comes to not only physical attacks, which you already cover, plus of course enemy crowd control effects, all of the mental ones. Now Half Orc can also make for a great vampiric tank, you already have the fangs there. But anyways, the Savage Attacks ability later on can become quite powerful when you start stacking higher bonuses to critical chance, especially for the second and third acts. For class, Barbarian is definitely the way to go for the ultimate lifesteal tank, because, well, first, Barbarian is already by default an absolutely stacked class, especially early game, right? At level 1 you already have Rage, which only grants you full physical resistance, that's half damage taken against all physical attacks, melee and ranged. At level 2 you have free advantage on all hits on demand, permanently. And then at level 3 we'll get our special Barbarian spammable cleave. And the more enemies you hit at once per attack, the more you will regenerate when it comes to HP. That's 6 per enemy and you have 18 per cleave. Therefore, Barbarian will be amazing not only for tanking, life-stealing, but even inflicting damage as area of effect. So it's the best of all worlds, basically. For your ability scores, be sure to focus into strength. You are a hulking, raging barbarian after all. All of the best weapons for this build are based on strength. Dump charisma and intelligence like a good dumb barbarian. 10 wisdom is more than enough. I would then start with 14 constitution. You don't need more, barbarians already have high hit point progression. Plus, well, you lifesteal quite a lot per turn and have resistance to physical damage. Therefore, spend the rest of the points into dexterity as usual, mostly for initiative, right? After all, if you don't act before the enemies, how can you tank them? Or debuff them or steal their hit points? They'll just attack you first instead. You don't want that. For your skill points, athletics definitely, so you don't get pushed and shoved by enemies so easily. And the remaining skill is truly up to you, right? Depending on your race, or for example has intimidation, otherwise I would pick it because it's a classic barbarian skill. With Githyanki, however, you can get bonuses to all of the main dialogue skills: intimidation, persuasion, and also deception, because they are all charisma based. Something fun as always is to pick the guild artisan background, not quite fitting thematically for this build, but insight is one of the most common dialogue checks, the same for persuasion. Right at level 2 of course you get the extremely powerful reckless attack for free advantage on all hits. Just remember you can also automatically apply this to your barbarian cleave, the one you'll get at the next level, by simply setting it as a reaction, right? I'd also prefer unchecking the ask box, because I don't want it to ask me every single time. I always want that to be used automatically. The downside of enemies having advantage against you doesn't matter, because like I said, you have full physical damage resistance from Rage, plus of course Lifesteal. And later even the Radiating Orb debuff to wreck enemies' attack rolls. At level 3 we get to select our Barbarian subclass, and you absolutely want Wild Heart. Mostly because of the Tiger Heart Rage power. This enables you to spam the Tiger's Bloodlust Cleave power as many times as you want, limited only by how many attacks per action you have. It even automatically makes enemies bleed for extra damage later if they manage to survive, but most importantly, by hitting up to 3 enemies with every single attack, that's how you regenerate such a high amount of hit points per turn, 6 per each enemy hit. As far as the extra tanking capabilities of Bearheart, don't bother, I mean, it's nowhere near as good for Lifesteal, plus you can just have someone cast the Warding Bond spell on you for way more, including psychic damage. Now for your first feat at level 4, unfortunately, Great Weapon Master will not work with the main Lifesteal weapon you'll be using for around 95% of the game, the Shattered Flail. Even if you don't have anything on the offhand, it won't be treated as a two-handed weapon for this purpose. Yes, losing around 10 points of damage per attack is somewhat sad, but you'll have other ways of making up for that, such as higher critical range. Which is why I recommend you go with the Dual Wielder feat. It automatically increases your AC. Second, you can equip quite nice weapons for passives on the offhand even as early as Act 1, such as the Knife of the Undermountain King for higher critical chance, later even a secondary life-stealing sword during Act 2. Of course, if you wanna go with shields, although I don't think it's necessary, don't bother picking this at all. You can also go with ability improvement to maximize your strength, but I'd rather delay this for later. Alert, I wouldn't recommend unless you plan on multiclassing at level 5, right? Because Barbarians, by remaining pure, will get an ability that's similar enough for free. Savage Attacker can also help with your damage, but that's mostly for later because that is when you start getting very high critical chance. Now, while it is true that the best lifesteal weapon in the game is a Great Sword, which means it qualifies for Great Weapon Master, you can only find it at Act 3, and it's not at the beginning of the act even, you actually have to work for it, including defeating a special boss. Therefore, if you want to use that Great Sword, simply respec your character out of Dual Wielder into Great Weapon Master once you finally find this weapon, right? Because there's no point in doing it before. At level 5 we have our second attack per action, and by the way, this does work with your Tiger's Cleave, so you have double cleaves per each action. Now from level 6 onwards you can actually multiclass your character into something else. For example, a very cheesy combo is Warlock and Pact of the Blade, because 5 levels of it will let you achieve 3 attacks per action, that's also 3 cleaves per action. The problem is the main benefit only comes at level 5, right? So at this point, level 10. I would only bother with this if you wanted to respec at level 10, then the remaining 2 levels can go into Fighter for Action Surge. While the Fiend subclass would also help with temporary hit points, or Great Old One for fearing enemies on critical hits. Your Reckless attack ability can help you get higher criticals even early. Now there's also other class combinations you can go for, like Paladin for Smites, but only Warlock would grant you the extra attack per action. Even something like Cleric and Life Cleric if you also want to heal your allies, right, instead of just being a lifesteal tank for yourself. Anyways, I'd rather remain a pure Barbarian, not just for higher rage uses, after all, we can only cleave to our maximum benefit when raging, but there's 2 secondary bonuses we'll get until level 9. The first animal aspect at level 6 can't really be anything you want. I mean, Double Tiger is my preferred pick, because if the enemy is bleeding, and they will always be from your normal cleave, which automatically makes them bleed, you'll get double your strength modifier added to your attack rolls, kinda like the Tavern Brawler feat for free. It's just that the other aspects don't do much for this build. I mean, Bear can be nice if you want to be a Pack Mule Barbarian with double carrying capacity, but it's mostly for utility. And stuff like Stallion, I feel it's better for other types of builds like a Charging Barbarian. Elk at the very least can provide everyone in your party, including yourself, with higher movement speed if you want. It's not that much, however. Level 7 is when we get a very nice, unique barbarian power, Feral Instinct. This is kinda like a lesser version of the Alert feat. You have +3 to initiative instead of +5, and just like Alert, cannot be surprised. Quite powerful. With this and your decent enough dexterity score, you will have a very high chance of acting before almost all enemies, without having to get an extra feat, of course. And speaking about more feats, this is when I'd go for ability improvement and strength. But like I said, you can also go with Savage Attacker. Level 9 provides you with the last great pure barbarian bonus, Brutal Critical. Just like Savage Criticals, it will provide you more damage on critical hits, and at this point, well, you're very close to Act 3, which means all the critical boosting gear you can want. Now, from level 10 onwards, there's not that much of a point into remaining a pure barbarian, so this is when I'll multiclass into the classic fighter. At this point, because you'll be at Act 3, where you can find the best life-stealing weapon in the game, and it is a great sword, there's something to be said about picking great weapon fighting. Otherwise, just defense, or even 2-weapon fighting if you want, to remain dual-wielding. Level 11 means Action Surge, which of course translates into more cleave and more life-stealing. And for the last level, just the champion subclass as usual for even higher criticals. Now let us cover gear for our Vampiric life-stealing tank. For the helmet slot, as usual for Act 1, Haste Helmet for higher movement. For the second act, however, well, you can go with the Dark Justiciar or the Covert Cowl, it's just that they require you to be obscured, and you are a melee build which wants the enemy to be illuminated as to proc the Callous Glow Ring bonus. So honestly, you might as well just keep to the Haste Helm. For the final act, however, it's all about Saravok's Helm as usual for higher criticals, and well, the best life-stealing weapon also drops from the same enemy that drops this, so it's a match made in heaven. The Helm of Balduran can also work, as it does offer higher AC and some very minor regeneration. For cloaks, you might as well settle for the Cloak of Protection, after all it's more AC and saving throws, or the Cloak of Displacement later, which is, to be fair, better. But as a lifesteal tank, you might as well save it for someone else who cannot regenerate such high amounts of HP per turn. For armors, the Armor of Agility will provide the highest AC. As a barbarian, well, you cannot equip heavy armor without blocking your rage. But for the first act, even the second act, the Luminous Armor is my preferred pick because you can actually debuff the enemies with Radiating Orb just fine, even as early as Act 1, with multiple stacks even working as far as the current patch, number 4, through either the Crusader's Mantle, War Priest spell, or later during the second act, the Callous Glow Ring, as they are sources of free radiant damage. Callous Glow being the best because it's self-sustainable, and applied per hit, per cleave multiple times even, so it's really good. For gloves, during Act 1 you might as well keep to the Wondrous Gloves for higher AC. For the second act you can remain equipped with it, or go with Dark Justiciar for higher damage on cleaves. Even the Luminous Gloves can also work because, as I said, you have sources of radiant damage. Later, however, I would just settle for Helldusk for even higher damage on hit. As far as stuff like Rolling Underdog, you don't need it as a barbarian at all because you have Reckless Attack for free advantage, save it for another melee ally. For boots, since we are a tank, I'd rather the Evasive Shoes as early as possible for higher AC. For amulets, for once we don't want Broodmother's Revenge, rather the Periapt of Wound Closure, because it will maximize the number of hit points you heal, including from your lifesteal weapons. Both can heal you for 1d6. With this, they'll always heal for the maximum 6 hit points amount, which of course can go as high as 18 per cleave. Of course you can still go with Broodmothers for higher damage because, well, eventually you have such high defenses and damage that you kinda don't need as high regeneration. Just remember, Broodmothers will not activate from your very own self-lifesteals, right? You need someone to cast a healing spell on you. As far as rings, well, it's mostly the extra damage package. Caustic Band, of course, for higher damage for Act 1, and later for the second act, the Callous Glow Ring, especially useful to combine with the Radiating Orb debuffing gear like the Luminous Armor and Gloves. You can also go for Crusher's Ring early for higher movement, and just like the Gloves of the Growling Underdogs, save the risky ring for someone else, you already have free advantage. The Ring of Protection is another choice if you really want to min-max AC. As far as the Ring of Regeneration, I just don't see a point, right? Okay, 1 to 4 hit points per turn, you already heal 18 per cleave, and you have around 8 per turn. Now it can, however, automatically proc some buffs on heals, just like the Helm of Balduran, but I'd rather save that for a cleric. Now let us cover weapons and quick slots. Your best friend for 90%, 95% even of the game will be the Shattered Flail, available extremely early at Act 1 from the Null fight. It will regenerate 1 to 6 hit points per each individual attack. There's no limit to this whatsoever. Triple that with our Cleaves. The downside of going mad, if you don't hit an enemy each turn, it's never gonna happen because, come on, you have free advantage for easy chances of hitting the enemy, and multiple attacks as early as level 3 with your Barbarian Cleaves. You'll always be hitting something, plus high initiative as well. Then for the offhand you have two options. If you went with the dual wielder feat, of course, like I did, the Knife of the Undermountain King, also Act 1, for higher criticals. To make up for the fact Great Weapon Master, well, its static boost to damage will not apply to the Shattered Flail by virtue of being a one-handed weapon. Or, starting from the second act, the Sword of Lifestealing, which also fits this build, and can grant you quite a lot of temporary hit points. It's just that it's reliant on criticals. I'd rather the higher critical chance from Undermountain King. Now for the last and final act, however, that is when you can find the ultimate life-stealing weapon in the game, the Sword of Chaos, Sarevok's unique sword, back from BG2 with a vengeance. Just like the Shattered Flail, it does have a life steal, well, of the same amount, 1 to 6 hit points per each attack, with the advantage of being a two-handed weapon, so this can combine with the Great Weapon Master feat, which is why I said before, when you find this sword, ideally you want to respec out of dual wielding into Great Weapon Master, because you can fully make use of it. And of course it doesn't have the mad downside from Shattered Flail. You don't need it, however, you can remain dual wielding and equipped with the Shattered Flail and the Knife of the Undermountain King just fine, as I've showed in the earlier sections of this guide with battle footage. But Sarevok's is definitely better for damage. As far as ranged weapons, well, just a classic dead shot as usual. Later, for even more criticals, we have the helmet, the knife, the bow, and then the champion fighter for extra critical chance, even higher when you consider reckless attacks for advantage, but earlier just the classic bow of awareness for higher initiative. Or I suppose you can go with the Titan String bow if you want a ranged alternative, as it does higher damage based on your strength and you have enough dexterity for it to hit. As far as consumables, as always the Elixir of Bloodlust. After all, the more actions you have, the more lifesteal you'll have as well. Plus it also grants you extra temporary hit points, which can help with tanking. Well, alright friends, so this was it for my Regenerating Lifesteal Vampiric tank build. If you found it useful, please remember to like, subscribe, and consider becoming a channel member if you can. Your support is highly appreciated. Thank you for watching and see you next time, friends.